Hello everybody, welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips, and I want to talk about this gluten issue. I get an email every day, every hour about it. Well, here's how I'll start. Sensible healthcare practitioners like me got a brief reprieve from the mythology surrounding grains. I mean, Wheat Belly, like a lot of fad books, it kind of ran its course, or maybe people actually got to see the doctor who wrote it on TV, who's obese and unhealthy looking. I love John McDougall's comment about him. He says, if this guy has the secret to health, why does he look like this? I mean, that should occur to everybody. Well, the break is over, and we now have to deal with the latest storybook, Grain Brain. Dr. David Perlmutter weaves a fantastical tale, occasionally taking a break to use citations that have not much to do with his claims. For example, the fact that celiac patients respond to grains in a certain way has nothing to do with what you tell the general population to do with grains. And so it's the same as nuts. I mean, if you go into anaphylactic shock from eating nuts, you definitely shouldn't have them, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't have them. So trying to translate some of these specialized groups to recommendations to the whole public is just a ridiculous exercise in futility. Well, a recent interview with expert on this topic and researcher Alessio Fasano shed some light on the grain and gluten issue, and it's interesting for many reasons. So I'll start with celiac disease and what he has to say about that. About 1/3 of the population has genetic predisposition for celiac disease, yet only 1 in 133 people actually develop it. Well, so much for the gene theory as the source of all disease, right? And also so much for the idea that gluten is bad for everybody. Even in people who are genetically predisposed to develop celiac disease, the vast majority of them do not. Fasano says that there are environmental factors that contribute, such as bacteria, antibiotics, changes in diet, viruses, and even pregnancy. And his comments are really consistent with what we know about autoimmune diseases, that you start with a genetic predisposition, and then there's a triggering factor, or there might be several, and then diet either can make things better or make things worse. Usually it makes things worse because people don't know how to do better for themselves, until they end up at some place like the Wellness Forum. Fasano also addresses gluten sensitivity and says that about 6% of the population is gluten sensitive, and that this sensitivity is different from wheat allergy and celiac disease. He finds what he refers to as celebrity wheat and gluten bashing aggravating, and he states that a gluten-free diet is a medical necessity for some people but doesn't apply to many. He says the argument that our bodies are not designed to digest grains and gluten is just ridiculous. To give you some background, the farming of gluten-containing foods and grains is about 10,000 years old. And this might seem like a very short period of time in evolutionary terms, and that's right. But 10,000 years is a long time for a species to survive eating foods that are supposedly as toxic as the grain critics claim that grains actually are. Additionally, I would like to add that the increases in the incidence of the degenerative diseases that are attributed to eating grains have really started galloping along in the last couple of decades. And so it does beg the question, how is it that grains suddenly became toxic to eat after thousands and thousands of years of eating them? During this period of time, it's the rapid increase in junk foods and animal foods and protein and fat that has most likely been responsible for these new epidemics, if you want to call them that. Fasano addresses the allegation that digesting gluten or grains causes inflammation. As with all protein, it's not completely digested, and it does cause a small bump in inflammation levels. It's the case with all protein. Actually, this is one of the reasons why humans should be on a low-protein diet, no more than 10% of calories from protein. Most of us have encountered some people who are really crazy about the grain thing and have stopped eating grains, report that they've lost weight and they've experienced other health improvements. These conclusions are errors of attribution. Grain-free diets involve the elimination of refined and processed foods, and most of them involve the elimination of dairy products, and that'll inevitably result in some weight loss and improvement in some types of symptoms. But people shouldn't confuse feeling better with getting better, and lots of things work for weight loss that aren't safe. Many of you have heard me say this before. Chemotherapy works for weight loss, but we don't really recommend it around here, nor do we recommend cocaine addiction, which is also really effective. The grain-free diets almost always involve huge amounts of intake of animal foods, and we know that that increases the risk of diseases like cancer and heart disease. While I find the focus on grains and gluten distracting, we do need to thank the charlatans in the health field who write these crazy books and recommend grain and gluten-free diets. For increasing demand for gluten-free foods. Great tasting gluten-free options are available in every store and even in a growing number of restaurants. So when I started in this business almost 20 years ago, it was not fun to be gluten-free, and there wasn't a whole lot to eat in the way of pastas and crackers and that sort of thing. But the options are really better right now, and for people who really, really do need to restrict their intake of these foods, things are much better. Now, I abhor the thought of doing this, but I'm going to read Perlmutter's book and conduct an advanced study session on it in April in order to address the misconceptions in more detail. I'm going to have to practice my meditation skills. I may have to take more yoga classes and do more running just to avoid screaming and relieve my stress. But in the interest of scientific debate, I'm up to the task. So one of the advanced study sessions in April will be on this book. And I do expect to be rewarded and recognized for my patience and perseverance in reading this storybook and reporting to you on it. But I think it is important to do it, if for no other reason than to try and address this mythology once and for all. Okay, that's all for today. That's all for the week. As always, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and I will talk to you again next week.